I have 5 children. I'm 41 years old. I have custody of my children. And I could say easily that my children are the children of children of children of children. My grandmother could look in the mirror and in back of her, see herself in 5 living generations. And one thing I say to my children all the time, which actually is hurtful to me, is that my grandmother could look in that mirror and see 5 generations of losers. And the reason why I say that is because we have all kind of devolved from where my granddad was. So my granddad, I believe, was a great individual. You know, every story you hear about him, great. Kind of violent, but, you know, the rest was pretty good. But the rest of us, we all became parents way too young. I come from a family where every male relative old enough to go to prison has gone to prison, myself included. I have gone to prison for and been convicted for 9 shootings. And, you know, some of this is, I believe, as a result, again, hurting people. But beyond that, I think there's a larger hurt that's possible that we never look at. Like, I'm listening to my brother over here at the extreme end of the table from the Kennedy School, back in my hometown. And, you know, one thing he's talking about that kind of, you know, is giving me some experiences is that I don't think we're black anymore. And I think when we start listening to young people are kind of expressing that. Our black is not the same. Like, I tried to explain to someone one time, I'm like, you know, Barack is African American. Michelle's black. But what I mean by that is like, but you know what I mean? I mean, like, he doesn't have the same experience that Michelle has. I believe he's a great brother. I respect the fact that his choice of woman, all that or whatever, but he doesn't have the same experience that a lot of us have growing up in this country. He grew up in Hawaii and Indonesia. He doesn't understand. And so some of us, and why I say today that I don't believe we're black anymore, is because I think some of us have decided that in order to be successful, we have to emulate something that's not necessarily black. And so even when we start talking statistically about what it is to be black nowadays, now I hear that statistically we look just like everybody else. The divide financially is the same. So how'd that happen? You know, are we behaving exactly the same? You know, I mean, what is it with the distance between the haves and the haves not that are now transferred over to us? And so I think some of our young people see that distance and whatever created that distance, and they're just speaking about it. You know, and so I feel like there's a difference in my black. Like the last time I was here, I was talking about Dr. Rich, who's my mentor. One thing I realized is my normal was never his normal. And now, as of this morning, I feel like my black's not necessarily the same as other people's black. You know, and so I feel like when I go home, I feel like I'm standing on that bridge, and I feel like, you know, I'm looking at my family, not far removed family. I'm looking at my family, every single one of them. I'm the only one that, you know, not the only one that goes to work, but, you know, I'm the only one that has really tried hard to be, at least resemble an intellectual to some degree. And so I have the luxury of sitting on the podium with who's our Boston Jeffrey Canada. Sitting here, I just got finished reading about Mike's influence on your life, being called by Sister Wright Edelman. But I feel weird on that bridge, and I'm not sure which side I want to go to. And not necessarily that I want to go, and I think more it's a love crisis. It's a love crisis, and it's a love crisis because I love my people. And I'm not leaving them. And so for some reason I feel hurt that how did that 10% get all this wealth and we somehow forgot, not that we forgot, but we don't know how. We don't know how to do it. And so in my heart I feel like there's some folks, particularly when we talk about we're all fighting for certain things, we don't all fight the same way. I think there's some folks, I believe the folks in this room is more resemble the fight of what is our black government. I believe there's another crowd of actual black soldiers who we need to enlist and say, you know what, you all need to be a part of this. You all are the ones that are like, look, you're gonna go home, you're gonna be Mike for Jeff Canada. What was Mike's role in Jeff Canada's life? You know, so I'm like, all right, those are the folks we need to somehow figure out how to maximize everybody who's at the table here so that we don't mistakenly become like everybody that we don't believe we are. And if we're not careful, the stats just say we resemble it. Our intentions are not there, but the stats say so. And we need to be clear, like we're not going back like we need to. We're not Aunt Kitty. We're not really wrapping our arms around these young people. We set up programs and we go home at 5. We're not even like, in some cases, when you see the Peace Corps, them folks go and live in Africa in the village. How many of us actually abandon our big property? Where's my sister from Mississippi? And one thing there she goes with the yellow hoodie on. We were talking yesterday, and we were talking about my children. I have custody of my kids, so they stayed with their mother over the summer, right? Now I'm sitting up here, I own my property now. I'm on the bridge, but I'm kind of headed, I own my property now, right? But I'm like, all right, so I send my kids, they go with their mother. I'm not trying to be that dude. Me and, Big Brother Ken was talking. I'm not trying to be that dude, right? But I realized I don't need this house. I don't need it. I did it because I need to have a place to put my 5 kids, but once they grow up, they didn't call me once during the summer. So I'm like, maybe y'all gonna be the type of kids that y'all gonna explore the world, you're gonna go, you're gonna do what you gotta do. Fine, I love that. But I don't need this after that. And if that's the case, then man, give it to somebody else, or maybe, and when we start talking about why we don't see each other, I'm like, because our desire to be like everybody else and have this extreme amount of wealth and all of this stuff, it's like, it's not helping us. And we're not showing the images, like the Logan's Run I talk about. I don't have kind of the language that some folks have, but we were talking about Logan's Run. And I'm like, it's like we don't see modesty being celebrated. We don't see Thelma and James Evans as like a good black family. They lived in a 2-family in Cabrini. You know what I'm saying? We look at, and like I said, my idol last summer was the Huxtables. I wanted to be like them, and so for some reason in my head, I feel like I'm less of a black man if I don't do what Cliff did, but I'm not the black man I want to be if I'm not doing what James did. And I think James's story is a lot stronger than Cliff's story, because James did it under duress. James didn't run. James was there every day. We need more James Evans in the hood. We need to create the James Evans in the hood, because we don't have 6 years to wait till I graduate. My kids are dead by then.
One of the things that judges are learning, and I am very proud of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, as well as Casey Family Programs. They have developed and come together talking about courts catalyzing change, which is about implied racism and the overrepresentation of minorities in foster care. When I mentioned earlier that we had reduced our caseload substantially, in my mind, what I was trying to do was reduce the disparity of desperate services as well as overrepresentation. I didn't affect my rate of disrepresentation. I did affect my rate of just kids in foster care. So there are organizations that are looking at, and when I mentioned that I was here for a training, it was to learn how to train judges on our implicit biases, to teach judges that all of us are biased on some level about something, and that we can make decisions devoid of that bias. And that's what we have to do. You can't re-raise somebody, and you can't make someone not racist or prejudiced, but you can help them appreciate that they can make decisions that don't involve their implicit or their personal biases. And so I would suggest to you that there are a multitude of organizations that are working on this implicit bias, this overrepresentation of minorities. There is now funding that's being thrown about. As a matter of fact, I'm supposed to be in Arizona right now leading an organization of judges on the same issue. So there are organizations that are working on it. Have we solved the problem? Absolutely not. But we're committed to making certain that we recognize our own first, and then start working towards improving the outcomes for children.
Thank you.
I think we have to get past the place where it's the insurmountable obstacle. It's another obstacle that we have to understand, analyze, and then overcome, just like all the other obstacles that we have to face. And that's what people did, I think, in the context of the civil rights movement. They did it methodically. They did it over generations. They dismantled the legal piece of it, and they started talking about the social and the legal piece of it. And they put the time and the energy that was needed, and they had an incredible, and the reason that we're sitting in this place now is because they were not cowed by it. They could look it honestly in the face and then say, how are we going to dismantle it? And the same thing has to be true. And the thing I appreciate about Ron Ferguson is that he begins to give us some ideas about what we've got to do. How do we immunize our kids against that teacher who may not? How do we immunize? How do we help parents understand the role that they can play? How they have to begin to get engaged. So it becomes more than just raging at the system. We understand what we have to do to overcome. Last thing I'll say, just the other thing, and it's very hard to get this in the black community, this discussion about class. We just won't talk about the fact that we are not monolithic, not everybody's suffering in the same ways. And what are the obligations of those who've done pretty well as opposed to those who have not done very well at all? And these divides are not new. Nicholas LeMan, a lot of other people have talked about this. They go back to sharecropping days, even when we were all in the same communities. I know this is true in the church. We had things called paper bag tests. If you weren't lighter than a paper bag, you didn't get into certain churches. That's just the reality. And we won't have the honest conversation because we're afraid that we'll be divided and conquered and so on. But it keeps us from coming together and sitting down and really talking seriously about what our respective responsibilities are. So, I appreciate, I really thank Roy for doing it, and I hope we can press that forward because he's absolutely right. If we're going to do this, we've got to come together in ways we haven't for a long time.
I agree that racism exists. In fact, I teach about it. I've got like 10 different things where I talk about the dynamics of race and how it matters. I just don't think it's a big part of the story. It's the way it used to be. Okay, it's there. I mean, I sit in first class a lot. I get upgrades in US Air for free. And I usually don't feel very uncomfortable sitting there. The bigger problem right now has to do with the capacity and the lifestyles in our communities. And that's not to deny that race is there. But, and I'm part of the 10% that makes all the money at the top. But I send probably at least a third of it back to my relatives who are not part of the 10%. Okay, I wouldn't tell you how many people I've paid to get out of jail. Okay, I'm sure there are other folks in the audience who do the same thing. So we're still very connected. Okay. I've had those phone calls where, hey man, somebody's gonna come shoot mom if I don't give him some money because I was supposed to sell the drugs, but I used them, and so they come into the house, they got Uzis, man, I need $400. Okay, and the question is it $400 really gonna buy him some more drugs? Is there really somebody coming? What happens if I don't send it? Okay. So anyway, so when we get down in the, we're learning a lot about the things that parents do, that teachers do, that tends to help kids, and we also are learning a lot about just what is not being done and what could be done differently. And so I think, those of us can sit in rooms like this who do have the lifestyles, who have gotten our kids to do pretty well, who do have most of what we want, and complain that racism is a huge barrier. It didn't stop us from getting where we are.